Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar hosted by the Middle East Solar Industry Association. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gurmeet Kaur. I am a board member of MESIA and also the Marketing and Communications Director for MESIA. I'm also a partner at Pinson Masons. We are a global law firm specializing in energy and infrastructure words. And I'm very pleased to be here today to host this distinguished panel. The topic for our discussion today is on the energy outlook and renewable energy goals in the UAE. This is part of MESIA's webinar series, free webinar series that's been focusing on different countries in the region. So we've had the first two webinars on Egypt and Jordan, and now in the UAE, and we have a couple more to cover the other countries in the GCC region. And I would like to also take the opportunity now to introduce some of my panelists. So if I could take the opportunity now to introduce some of my panelists who you may see on the screen. So to start off with, I would like to ask Muna Ahmed Al-Moodi to just say a few words of introduction, so her name and role, etc. I'll hand over to you, Muna.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Muna Al-Amoudi. I'm the Director of Future Energy and the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure at the UAE. I'm actually managing any kind of new sources when it's come to the renewable energy, nuclear energy. I've been working in the domain of energy, sustainability, greenhouse gases, when it's come also to the life cycle assessment, auditing, 15,001, 14,001. Also, I'm coming with the private sector background, so it's almost 12 years in the field of electricity and water production. I used to work in Emirates Global Aluminium, covering their water and electricity plans, plus the sustainability aspect when it's come to the corporate projects and the carbon abatement strategy.
Great. Thank you very much. And if I could turn to Anup Isaac, please. I think you're on mute, Anup. Great.
Thanks, Gurmeet, MESIA and ATA for this opportunity, and it's my pleasure to be part of this panel. I work with Yellow Door Energy, and I'm part of UAE and Oman team. Yellow Door Energy is a solar developer and operates within the distributed solar space, where we finance, design, build, and operate the solar plants for the CNI customers.
Thank you very much. Can I turn to Bruce Smith next? We can't hear you, Bruce. I think you're muted as well.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
I think I've got an unstable internet connection here, so my apologies if you lose me. So good afternoon, my name is Bruce Smith. I'm the Forecasting and Planning Director at the Emirates Water and Electricity Company. EWEC is responsible for the secure and stable supply of power and water to our customers in Abu Dhabi and the Northern Emirates. Now, our primary objective is to deliver that power and water at the lowest possible cost. And my role as planning director is to identify the portfolio that enables us to deliver power and water at that lowest cost. So we're responsible for identifying what technologies and what capacity and what timing and in what location we need to be
Thank you very much, Bruce. Can I please turn to Mohammed bin Kuwair next?
Yes, thank you, Gurmeet. Do you hear me clearly?
Yes, I do.
Well, thank you first of all for hosting us and including me among those leaders in renewable energy. This is Mohammed bin Kouir, and I am heading the international business within the BIA Group. BIA is the leading sustainability and environmental solution company in the region. We have been established since 2007, and we have introduced unprecedented numbers when it comes to waste diversion away from landfill, introducing the first waste to energy facility and renewables as a whole. My role is to expand and look for new opportunities and explore potential markets here in the region.
Great, thank you very much, Mohammed. And our final speaker, last but not least, Sohail Murtaza.
Hi, Gurmit. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm a solar energy consultant by DMEGL. I'm involved in different projects from due diligences and also developing new tools for big data and AI. I'm here today to share my insights on this area.
Great, thank you very much, Sohail. So coming back to our topic, today we will be discussing about the outlook in the UAE. And as you all know, the Emirates has made significant progress over the coming years in terms of achieving its aggressive targets. And the current goals in the UAE is indeed very aggressive. The current target states that by 2050, UAE aims to produce about 50% of its energy from clean energy resources. And this is divided 44% into renewable energy sources and about 6% of nuclear. So you will hear from our experts today on some of the status and the pipeline of the UAE projects, and also importantly, what is the role of solar in this mix. And as you all know, 2020 has been a very, very challenging year indeed for all of us. We've had to contend with the COVID-19 pandemic, also coupled with the declining oil prices. And this has had a very significant impact on energy demand in the region and also in the UAE. So we will hear from some of our speakers today as well on how this has affected their projects and also how the electricity demand and the changes there is affecting the outlook in the UAE. And to start off then, could I please turn to Muna? And I'd like to ask you to give us a brief overview on what is the UAE government's strategy in terms of energy. Thank you.
Sorry, I think Muna, you're on mute.
Apologies, I missed that I was on mute. So I will repeat myself, just a minute. So to start the introduction part, I will start with a statement that we had from His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, the Vice President and Prime Minister of the UAE and the ruler of Emirates of Dubai, where basically he highlighted who does not think about or of energy does not or understand the need of the future or think about the future. Here it's clearly indication that the UAE leadership has been linking purely the development of the nation, the development of the UAE with the energy. So accordingly, we had developed the UAE National Energy Strategy 2050, and it was launched in 2017. It was his presence. We were blessed, actually. And on that, we've been able to announce the two targets that is commonly used on most of our communication. The supply to be basically 50% from the clean energy mix by 2015. And then also the demand side reduction to be 40% reduction from business as usual of 2015. Of course, there was multiple discussions with our stakeholder, starting from Abu Dhabi to Al Fujairah, when it's come to the setting these kind of targets in the national level. That includes some of our, let's say, local stakeholders like Department of Energy in Abu Dhabi, DEWA in Dubai, SIWA, and FIWA. And today's we also talking with IWEC as well, since they are also managing the Northern Emirates and Emirates of Abu Dhabi. On that, what I need to highlight is that whilst in the process of setting the national energy strategy, we had, alhamdulillah, the engagement of private and public entities in setting this target. Because the 50%, I want to say this, the 50% scenario was actually a scenario that was built considering different aspects. That includes, for example, when we talk about sustainability elements, and the climate change impact, when we talk also about affordability and security of the supply. So on that, I'm here talking about the objective of the strategy itself. So why we having this strategy developed, and why it's basically been endorsed to some extent by all our local stakeholders. First, because it's talking about delivering clean, secure, affordable energy, while thinking about the environment responsibility, maximizing the productivity when it's come to ensuring the economic growth of and the happiness of our residents, the response to the risk when it's come to the climate change, and reducing the greenhouse gases while producing the energy sustainably. So these aspects when it's come to the sustainability, economic development, climate change impact, happiness, and well-being of our residents. So driving to the conclusion of getting the energy mix in the future of 2050, where basically we are highlighting that the penetration of the energy or renewable energy will be approximately 44%. And with that also 6% coming from the nuclear as a clean energy to have the overall 50% target achieved. With that, complementing that with the reduction in the, how I can say, a reduction in the efficiency from different sectors that include building, transport, and industry to support the reduction that we are aiming for, which is 70% in the greenhouse gases from the power generation sector. Talking about the clean energy projects, here I'm highlighting few of the key important projects that has been happening here in the ground in the UAE. Starting from Masdar, which was one of the first, and then Sheikh Mohammed Solar Park, which is in different phases. And as you can see, we can see some of the phases that is still under construction or just announced. We having also projects that's coming also in the Northern Emirates, like the one announced with FIWA, with Al Qaywin government, and that is to be operational hopefully by 2024. Here I'm sharing the data that was shared between us and the stakeholder, different stakeholder. And on that, there was different discussion about the capacity and basically the start date of different plants. And some of them is already operational, as I can see, it's in green, plus the things that are under construction in yellow, and then the blue ones, which is about the announcement. What I need to highlight in this graph that I'm missing the BIA project. I hope my colleague Mohammed from BIA can highlight that, because this is one of the, how I can say, a newly announced project. Additionally, I want to highlight here about the distributed rooftop that has also been a contribution from private and the government entity here, and it's approximately 165 megawatt, plus the megawatts generation from different projects that is across the UAE. This is the end of my presentation. Let me know if there is any question, or shall we take it at the end of this?
Great. Yes, thank you very much, Muna. That's been very, very insightful. And it seems like, you know, there are a lot of plans, obviously, in terms of future projects. And also there's been significant progress made, as you've seen from the different slides. I'd like to say to the audience as well, there is a chat box, a Q&A chat box. So please do feel free to send your questions through as the panels progress. And we will take questions at the very end. I would leave about 10 minutes or so we can address some of the audience questions. As I mentioned before, COVID-19 has had a huge impact on, solar projects in the region last year, and also those in the UAE. And obviously, it's had an impact on the energy demand as well. As we've seen from what Muna's presented, there has been a huge number of solar projects that's been deployed in the UAE. Obviously, the Al Dhafra project, we've seen about the Mohammed bin Rashid solar park here in Dubai, where an additional 800 megawatts has come online as well. And then we've got nuclear energy that is online now in Abu Dhabi as well. And all this is adding, obviously, to the energy mix. And I would be very interested to hear what the views of the panel are on what this means for the future of solar in UAE, in particular due to some of the changing demand in energy. And when we talk about solar, how do you see this progressing in UAE? Is it going to be more along large-scale utility-sized projects that would be coming online, or is there going to be more scope for distributed generation in UAE? And if I could turn to Bruce, please, to get your views on this.
Thank you. Well, I think the short-term impact of COVID last year was somewhat unexpected, at least initially. What actually happened was, unlike most of Europe and many other jurisdictions in North America, we saw an increase in demand as a result of people basically not being able to move. So the population in the UAE stayed pretty high because of movement restrictions and the fact that everybody was at home in their homes running AC, whilst the shopping malls and the commercial properties continued to need to be cooled as well. So we saw an increase in demand compared with what we forecast at the start of the year. Longer term, we would expect there to be a fallback in terms of GDP growth as a consequence of COVID, and the rate of pickup, well, that remains to be seen. So the net effect is likely to be a slowdown in long-term growth, reflecting whatever the long-term impact on GDP is. Now, in terms of technologies, what does that mean in terms of the build-out of renewables? Well, at the moment, we've got a combination of nuclear, and the first reactor is due to be commissioned in the next few weeks. And that will be followed by 3 more large reactors over the next few years. As you've already seen, we've got about 2.5 gigawatts of solar PV in the Abu Dhabi system, plus there's the capacity in Dubai. But we also have existing long-term gas contracts. And the problem with those gas contracts is that they are what's called take or pay, take it or leave it, in other words. But if we leave it, we still pay for it. And the reality, therefore, is that at the point where we start to eat into the amount of gas that we saved all the gas that we can in terms of the gas that's flexible. And then if we start to eat into gas that we still have to pay for, solar doesn't make sense. So what we're seeing is a restriction in terms of the optimum amount of solar that we need to build in the system being reached really after the next big project in Abu Dhabi. We probably wouldn't see another significant project until 2025 or 2026, although that obviously depends on the extent of integration. The more we can integrate, the bigger the demand we can create, the more solar we can put into the system. And that would similarly apply with distributed generation. But let's come back to that question subsequently.
Great, thank you, Bruce. That's very insightful. Now, if I could turn to a developer, it'll be very interesting to get your viewpoint as well. Perhaps I could start with Anup, just your thoughts on distributed solar and how COVID has impacted on some of your activities last year.
Yeah, Gurmeet. So with respect to COVID, I would say we did face some challenges. We did have, on the brighter side, we had many opportunities too. The challenges, if I have to highlight, one of the biggest challenge what we faced was the interruption in the supply chain side of it, where it has impacted the component prices to go up. And there were slight delays, I would say, in the construction due to lockdowns and travel restrictions. These were some of the major challenges what we faced. However, on the opportunity side of it, and I see that COVID has brought in a lot of opportunity because the companies or the industries in which we operate, that is a CNI, they've become more cost conscious and want to be more competitive. as possible as they want to come out when they come out of COVID. So in last 2 quarters, I would say that we have signed 12 solar agreements within different industries. And that way we have helped the industries or the CNI segment in UAE to be more competitive and manage their own energy needs. So I would put it this way: the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us that renewables are more resilient than other energy sources. It's because they are uniquely positioned to provide centralized and decentralized energy solutions. So we have, or we are to plan for a green recovery. We strongly believe that renewables should be part of that recovery.
And what do you think specifically about the future of distributed solar then? I think there was a question here as well on what sort of plans, what kind of plans are there regarding net metering in the future in UAE? I wonder if you could comment briefly on that as well from your experience to date.
Yeah, today, if I have to talk about UAE, Dubai, under Dubai, DIWA Shams Dubai program, which has been very successful. And as Muna's slide showed, 165 megawatt worth of projects has been already commissioned in Dubai. And if I talk about the other opportunities in other Emirates, we had recently seen a big announcement in RAK through RAK municipality, where there were new projects coming up and opening up out there. So going back to your question, as I said, companies have become more conscious in how they can reduce the energy cost, because it's somewhere around 15 to 20% of their total overheads. And if they have an opportunity, if they have a roof where they can install and operate a solar plant, and they have companies like Yellow Door Energy who can support them from the investment perspective too, then this solution becomes very feasible, and this really helps them.
Okay, great. And now if I could turn to Mohammed, obviously BIA has been a leader as well in terms of renewable energy, in particular waste energy. I'd be interested in your views as well on how COVID-19 has impacted your projects and also the future for solar for BIA and I guess Sharjah in particular.
Thank you, Gurmeet. Well, if we see that renewables had made up to 90% of the new energy capacity last year, and also the prospects are extremely bright for 2021. There will be an expected fast growth in renewables in general. There has been a lot of major record-breaking projects announced this year, and there is already record inflows for investment related to sustainability. So in total, the UAE has further impetus to increase the renewable mix to meet the goals of the energy strategy, as stated by my colleague Muna. And specific to BIA's outlook for the renewable energy, there has been recent announcements of the solar on top of the landfill, the waste to energy, our flagship projects in renewables, which is a joint venture between Masdar and BIA. So we are currently developing the Sharjah waste to energy facility under the flagship of Emirates Waste to Energy. This facility will be processing 300,000 tons of non-recyclable materials to generate clean 30 megawatts of power to power up to 28,000 houses here in the Emirate of Sharjah. This complements our efforts to move towards the circular economy, because we see that non-recyclable waste would otherwise be sent to landfill. Talking about landfills, we have recently announced the 120 megawatts photovoltaic project on top of the landfill. Our outlook is to repurpose our redundant dump sites and landfills to bring more value from those spaces to generate power. So also this is a joint venture between Masdar and Emirates Waste to Energy Company. The project is expected to commission in 2023. This project will be the first of its kind here in the UAE. The non-conventional solar power on top of landfills would definitely repurpose landfills across the region. We are looking forward to explore further opportunities in this domain. So definitely there is a huge potential in the coming years for renewables.
Great, thank you very much, Mohammed. That's very interesting on repurposing landfill sites to put solar. And I'm certainly aware of in one other country, I think Bahrain has done that as well. So hopefully we'll see more of that happening in the region. Just wanted to actually jump now to a technology-based question, but also to pick up on something Anup had said earlier, and about getting more and more distributed generation in the mix. I think one issue that has come up in the past is just on whether that can raise sort of any issues in terms of grid stability. And I was just wondering, in terms of technology and development in technology, whether there has now been more solutions that we can look at as well. And if I could just go back to Bruce to pick up on this discussion on grid stability and the additional impact of, I guess, renewable energy on the grid and how that can be managed.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think if we are saying that our objective is to maximize the amount of renewable energy that we have in the system, because renewable energy is the cheapest energy that we've got out there today, the question is, how can we put even more into the system, given the challenges we face with intermittency? Now, traditionally, solar has been a sort of take everything that they provide, and the flexible gas-fired generation, and more recently the battery powered generation, or the battery powered energy source, fills in the gaps. But it's perfectly possible for solar to actually contribute to these ancillary services that the grid needs in order to maintain its stability. In other words, if we maintain a certain amount of headroom or footroom in the control of the dispatch of solar, so we treat it as a dispatchable resource, not as a firm output that we have to take when it's there. We don't take it when it's not there, obviously, because we can't. But if we invest in the control systems that allow solar to contribute towards the grid stability, then it will allow the value that it contributes towards the system to be maximized. And that in turn will increase the proportion of renewable energy that can be injected into the system overall. So with solar now at about half the price of gas-fired generation, even with the cheap gas prices that we have in this region today, the challenge is not so much around the energy price, but how do we maximize the value of these additional ancillary services that renewable energy is perfectly capable of providing, particularly solar, through the addition of more sophisticated control systems. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much for that insights. And I understand also there's been a lot of different technology development around, for example, artificial intelligence, big data, and the like, that has helped in particular to bring down the cost of solar. And if I could turn to Sohail, could you give us some description on what kind of developments you have been seeing in the last couple of years, and how this is likely to impact on the levelized cost of electricity? Obviously, I think one of the questions on everybody's mind is, are we likely to see a further driving down of the prices of solar power, in particular for utility scale projects? So perhaps you can comment on that.
Sure, Gurmeet. We have seen indeed the lowest feed-in tariffs in the past year. I believe it was for Al Dhafra project. Of course, we have seen that the capex of the projects, of the solar projects, have been reduced significantly from 2010. We see more or less 80% reduction in the capex of the project. But then you might ask that where is the capture, where is the more potential that we can tap in and reduce even the total cost of the project. And now I'm talking about OPEX, because most of the focus has been on the CAPEX of the projects. And now we are actually at the stage that we see that the net present value of the OPEX of the projects are actually exceeding the CAPEX. So there is a lot of potential there to tap in and capture and reduce the OPEX of the projects. And one of the best tools that we can apply to reduce the OPEX is indeed big data and AI. First, we really what we see. I'm based in Arnhem in the Netherlands, where headquarters of DMVGL Energy is. So we kind of have a global overview on all the projects, as well as the projects in UAE. We see that there is a huge potential, a very big potential to reduce the CAPEX of the OPEX of the project. Excuse me. And yeah, maybe I can add a few more sentences, and that is we really need to, a data infrastructure for the OPEX, and having a holistic approach how to tackle OPEX and also reduce costs of O&M, and applying data and automation to reduce O&M costs, and therefore we will have a lower LCOE of the electricity. Plus, what I can say is by application of AI, we can extend the lifetime of the solar projects. That has a direct significant impact on lowering the LCOE.
Okay, great, thank you. And perhaps I could just also ask Anup or Muhammad if either one of them have any comments in terms of their projects, and whether there's been any new technology developments that they've seen there that has led to some reduction in terms of cost, whether it's OPEX or CAPEX.
Gurmeet, so I just want to highlight on one point, that is on the AI side of it, and machine learning, which Yellow Door Energy having over 100 megawatt of projects in the distributed space. What we do is we do use that data collected from different different areas and different projects, and that gives us the precise predictions what we offer to our customers, and also it gives us the precise data in our design, which helps us to surely reduce our cost on O&M side of it. In maintaining the plant, it helps us, and to be more precise in our predictions. So that way it helps us in the investment side of it. It also helps in from the customer's perspective. Customer benefits the most, because the data what we use, it is relevant to their needs. And third, on the operational side, there is a huge reduction which comes in because of these predictions.
Okay, great. That's very insightful indeed. Now turning to another topic that's of interest to our members, and this is something you've touched on, which is investment. So obviously, in order to deploy the amount of solar that we're expecting to deploy in the coming years, a key aspect is financing. And how is it that we can attract more investment and also different financing options to some of these projects? So perhaps I can start with Muhammad. I'd be interested in knowing a little bit about how some of your projects have been financed, and what do you see is needed in order to upscale investment in renewables, and also if you're seeing any interesting lending products out there.
Yes, so looking at renewables, we have recently seen huge support and incentives from the government to support commercializing those projects. I'll take an example, our waste to energy facility. As we may know, introducing a new industry in an oil-based economy, it might be a bit challenging, let alone the commerciality of the waste-to-energy facility. However, the structured loan of the waste-to-energy on a soft mini-perm structure to finance the Sharjah waste-to-energy facility, the deal was the first of its kind in the region, bringing together a consortium of more than 5 banks to finance the project on a non-recourse basis. So if we look at commercializing and financing those projects, we have seen recent changes supporting establishing projects in this industry. Renewables by itself is something growing in the region. The scale is something very important when it comes to financing those projects. So BIA is receiving strong support from the government when it comes to financing those projects, as well as the market now is supporting renewables. So in general, there is a lot of opportunities for financing renewables.
And what about Anoop, in terms of your projects in the distributed generation sector?
Yeah, I have a similar thoughts of my colleague Mohammed, and in his previous line, what he mentioned was there is a lot of attraction, or there's like investors are very much interested to come and invest in the renewable sector. So we have seen a lot of capital being allocated towards sustainable investment, especially solar energy in the last couple of years. You know, considering our story itself in 2020, we were awarded over $41 million worth of projects itself, and our pipeline or the targets what we have to invest over $100 million worth of projects in 2021. Our existing shareholders, that is Mitsui and Co., IFC, Equinor, Apicorp, they are continually supporting us in reinvesting and increasing the equities side of it. And if, just recently you would have heard about, we were able to raise 31.2 million senior secured loans from EBRD, DEG, and GF. So a lot of financial institutions are coming forward in supporting and investing in these renewable energy projects. So I see that the lenders and investors are seeking out opportunities with high returns to deploy capital, and renewable is the one. And this is really going to be helpful in achieving that green recovery, what we are talking about.
And are you seeing a lot of local banks getting involved?
Yes, we do. We are seeing it. It's a very early stage right now. So there are a lot of transactions, discussions which is happening out there, and there is a lot of interest. I would say it's on a positive side. It's a lot of interest, and very soon we will be coming up with some of our arrangements with the local banks itself.
Great. And could I just turn to Muna now, just to get a perspective from the government side on whether there are any sort of incentives or any schemes that are being devised to help, get some financing into these projects?
When it's come to the investment and financing of renewable projects, I think what was supporting all this kind of movement that we have in the market was the launch of the strategy itself. Because if the country do not have a political direction, there is like a leadership direction, strategic direction, indicating that the country, there is a huge interest from the leadership till their other local stakeholders, like different utilities, in order to deploy these projects or show the interest to deploy these kind of projects, the investor won't be able to come or to show the interest that they are. So with the launch of the strategy and with the announcement that we have, for example, from Abu Dhabi, from Dubai on their targets as well, when it's come to the clean energy and renewable energy targets, that helped to basically have the market, how I can say, developed here in the UAE. And then also the model has been used, the model that has been used, like the IPP model, where basically some share of the investment will be managed by the utilities themselves and some share will be managed by the private sector. So that will help to manage the risk of the project as well. At the early stage, that was, how I can say, win-win situation. Now we can see that that's also playing a role to have a bigger projects, not a small scale. We are talking about, maybe Bruce can give us better, Al-Dhafra project, for example, Sheikh Mohammed Solar Park in Dubai. See the scale of the project, comparing even to the other region. You cannot see deployment in this scale in other regions, and at least in one location or in a specific site. So with that kind of deployment, with this kind of, let's say, market, for example, when we talk about policies, regulation, targets announcement from the government itself, the utility themselves as being engaged in deploying these kind of projects to support the electricity generation from different sources and ensuring their security, for example. So all of that will definitely play a role to basically receive investors, to receive their to get their interest, their attention. That UAE is one of the region and one of the active region, and one of the regions that also break the records. So so with that, I think it's not only to do with how I can say, with the announcement definitely that we had for the national energy strategy, but I feel what Dubai and Abu Dhabi did as a utilities when it comes, let's say, for example, previously EDWIC and now EWIC, for example, and Department of Energy of Abu Dhabi, DEWA, with their announcement when they had clearly indicated that they're going into the renewable market, going to deploy these kind of projects, and they were very clear about managing the risk associated with these kind of projects. The investor were very much happy to have these kind of investment taking place in the UAE. Definitely, there are other factors within the UAE will attract the investor from any sector, not only the renewable, as we know. Mm-hmm. The platform about the, for example, when we talk about the land, simple, easy example that I normally give when I talk about the renewable, the land here in the UAE is free of charge. But when you go to the other region, it's not free of charge. You need to pay for it. So it's additional cost for the project. So these kind of facilitating, how I can say, things that will support to make the market of the UAE attractive. That include that the investor will be interested to invest, interested to stay as well, mm-hmm. to their project and have more. I think this is all will hopefully help us to achieve our direction to, of getting the 50% even before 2050.
Great. Thank you for that. And Bruce, did you have anything further to add from an Abu Dhabi perspective, in particular, some of the large-scale projects that successfully achieved financing recently?
I mean, I think Abu Dhabi's been running these large-scale PPA and PWPA projects now for 20 years, more than 20 years. And we've got a very solid reputation in the market for honoring those contracts. I think that gives developers a lot of confidence when they come to do business in Abu Dhabi. Historically, those contracts have been underwritten by a sovereign guarantee as well. So EWEC is the off-taker. We guarantee to make the payments for the duration of the contracts. So really, from a developer's perspective, there is relatively low risk. And I think the consequence of that has been we've seen these world record low prices, not just for solar projects, but also for gas-fired projects and for desalinated water, most recently the RO project up in Taweelah. So, you know, it's an investment environment that suits these large-scale developments, and we're seeing the lowest possible price of renewable energy in the system from these large utility-scale projects, much lower than you get from distributed generation, I'd add.
Great, thank you very much for that. That has been very interesting indeed. And I just wanted to touch on one last final thing before we take to questions from the audience. And this is concerning some of the new technology and new projects that we are seeing now in the UAE. So one example is the floating solar tenders that's recently been announced in Dubai. And then also there's been a lot of talk about hydrogen projects coming up in the UAE. So could I maybe turn to MENA first to discuss or to share some insight on what is the hydrogen strategy in the UAE?
Yes, I think what was announced recently during Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week and what was announced by Abu Dhabi government earlier about assigning ADNOC to be basically doing the exploration how the hydrogen economy can develop in the Emirates of Abu Dhabi. Within that, I need to highlight that the ministry been engaged in dialogues about hydrogen since almost 3 years. So for those of you who's not familiar with the hydrogen, we've been talking about it almost in 2000, late 2018, early 2018. So just to indicate that the work about establishing the market of the hydrogen here in the UAE has been there since almost, as I mentioned, 3 years. It was the talk of the ministry with different stakeholders, including the ones in Abu Dhabi. And then also what we've been seeing from DIWA, the announcement of the first pilot and Expo. Within that, also the alliances that was announced recently in Abu Dhabi, the 2 alliances that was announced from Mubadala, ADNOC, and also from Masdar and other parties, even within not abroad, not within the UAE, in deploying certain projects in Abu Dhabi. Definitely the scale of use today we are talking about, most probably it will be linked to the electrification and the storage. When it's come, let's say, for example, powering certain vehicles, using the hydrogen for the transportation, and then also looking as an option to have the hydrogen used for the electricity storage. The talk about it and how it should be used within the, let's say, the full energy system is not yet completed. It's still yet to be finalized. We have established the technical committee under the umbrella of the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure, where basically we having different stakeholders and we are sharing with them our views about the hydrogen, what we are getting from our different bilateral engagement when it's come the interest of different international market, like for example, Germany, Japan, Korea, UK, US, who definitely show that they are very much interested to get some hydrogen from UAE. So that dialogue has also been happening with our local stakeholder. I will also highlight here that the ministry is working on something about the hydrogen when it's come to the policies and strategy. It's not yet finalized, it's still in the draft stage, but this is something also will be part of our national energy strategy review, which is happening this year. So what will be the role of the hydrogen and the transition of the UAE? So that to be defined as a part of the review for the national energy strategy. Is it the 2050 will be valid with the 44% only purely from renewable, or we have certain percentage also will be coming from other sources, including the hydrogen?
Great, thank you very much. That sounds very interesting. So we need to look out for the new strategy and how that hydrogen and other forms would fit into that. And can I turn to Sohail then? I think you, DNV, has some experience in floating solar, and just wanted your comments on some of the tenders and the projects we're seeing in the region now in relation to floating solar.
Indeed, DMVGL now has the joint industry program that we gather the top 30 players in the industry of floating solar, and we are writing the recommended market industry practices. So it's going to serve as a guideline in the industry globally for the floating solar. From the projects, floating and hydrogen is not specifically the area of my expertise, but I know that we are involved in UAE with different feasibility study projects and in Zaya Nurai Island, and also the DIWA for floating solar and storage lakes. So a couple of lakes that I know we are involved and we are supporting our customers for the feasibility studies and development of their projects. On hydrogen, I can say that it has been a few weeks ago that it's been announced that the oil and gas business area of DMEGL is integrated to the energy business area. So, and that is for the purpose of reaching our energy transition goals. So a lot is happening in regarding hydrogen. A lot of projects, some of them I cannot disclose more, some of them I don't have the expertise for to talk about, but this is a brief overview I can give.
Okay, great, thank you. It sounds like anyway there's going to be more developments and more projects in both these areas. I guess a challenge with any new area is really on how cost competitive it is ultimately. I'm sure even when solar started many years back, you know, a lot of people were skeptical because, you know, of the prices, but then over the period of time, you know, we've seen a decline in prices, and that's then led to the uptake. And I think this will be one factor as well that would, you know, come into play when we're looking at hydrogen projects in the future. There's been a couple of questions now from the audience, so I would like to address some of them to the panelists, if I may. So the first one is, perhaps I can ask Muna on this, or Bruce even. There's a question from the audience on whether there are net metering plans for Abu Dhabi. And if anyone could comment on what's happening in terms of net metering in Abu Dhabi.
Bruce, if you can take the answer, please.
Yeah, I'll happily respond to that one. I mean, we haven't got a representative from the Abu Dhabi regulator here, so I will take the liberty of giving my view. So this is a EWEC perspective. So our objective is to minimize the cost of supplying our customers with power and water. What net metering projects have traditionally done is to allow more expensive distributed generation to be integrated into the system. And as I mentioned earlier, the best way of integrating the maximum amount of renewables is to put these control systems onto these new utility scale projects that allow them to contribute these ancillary services, whether it's grid stability, synthetic inertia, upwards and downwards reserve. Now, that's very difficult to achieve with distributed generation. So net metering does not enable the lowest cost supply of power and water to customers. So at the moment, net metering is not permitted within Abu Dhabi. I think it's quite likely that over time there will need to be an allowance to permit distributed generation and solar rooftop to be introduced into Abu Dhabi. But I think the pricing structure needs to reflect what that energy being injected into the system by those generation sources is actually worth. So if it's possible for distributed generation to provide energy that's lower cost than the grid is able to supply, then it absolutely should be allowed to do so, and it should be allowed to compete. But what we're seeing is with these large utility scale projects is world record low prices. I mean, the next project in Abu Dhabi is likely to be below $10 per megawatt hour. It's going to be very challenging for distributed generation on a small scale to be able to compete with that sort of rate. So when the objective of a not-for-profit entity like EWEC is to provide power and water to its customers at lowest cost, and we're also promoting the sustainability agenda and minimum carbon emissions, that objective is best served by fairly reflecting what costs of total system supply would be. And distributed generation it's a difficult fit in a fully grid connected system like Abu Dhabi.
Great, thank you very much for that, Bruce. There's a question here also on financing, and perhaps I could ask either Muhammad or Anup to comment. And the question is, you know, what about green bonds in the region? Are there any efforts in structuring green bonds in some of these projects?
Go ahead, Anup, if you wish.
Sorry, we couldn't hear you very well, Mohammed.
Gurmeet, I think, sorry, I think Mohammed wanted to say something.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. So yeah, the question is just on whether you've seen green bonds being used in terms of some of the project financing, or if there's been any efforts by any party really to use green bonds. And yeah, I guess even Anup or Bruce, if you've got any comments on the use of the bonds in financing these renewable projects, that would be great to hear your thoughts.
My knowledge, we had a lot of chats or a lot of talks were happening in the initial stage, but I've not seen. Maybe I'm wrong, so I wouldn't be commenting on that. I'll leave it to Mr. Bruce to comment on that.
Well, we haven't done it. We haven't done any green bonds as such at this point in time. It is something that we are looking at, and we're trying to determine what advantages that might bring us. Of course, from a procurer's perspective, the advantage might be increased flexibility, being able to pool funding or financing for multiple projects, maybe related projects in the green space. So it may be across a portfolio of options, but it's not something that we have got firm plans in place. It's something that's in the exploration phase at this stage.
Yeah, that's been my understanding as well. You know, in terms of a number of the project financings in this region, there hasn't been that much in terms of green bonds or bonds in general, but, you know, there's been a lot of talks, and we may see these products in the future. There was another question here on the use of concentrated solar power, and they wanted more information. If anyone from the panel can highlight a little bit more about the use of CSP. I guess one example was Shams 1, and another one would be, of course, the Dubai project here, phase 4 of the Mohammed bin Rashid Solar Park. So I wonder if either Muna or Bruce, whether you've got any commentary on whether there are likely to be any more CSP, you know, in the pipeline in the UAE.
Shall I pick that up from an Abu Dhabi perspective to start with, Mona?
Yeah.
I'd say our planning mandate is least cost, and solar from PV is winning hands down in the race to provide the cheapest possible source of not just renewable energy, frankly, it's energy, any energy. And the problem in this region in particular is that the direct radiation, the radiation that's important in order for the cost of concentrated solar power or CSP to be competitive, are actually not very good. Those radiation levels are hindered by the fact that we live in a desert environment, and there's a lot of very fine dust particles in the air, and that restricts the amount of energy that these parabolic troughs can actually capture and convert. So what we're seeing is that PV is less affected by those. The diffracted radiation that we get and that PV panels can utilize is less affected by the dusty conditions that we have typically often have here in the region. So just from a simple cost perspective, simple cost economics, project economics, it's harder for CSP. And of course, if you've got a layer of dust on these mirrors, they need cleaning very regularly. So we had Sahel talking about OPEX costs earlier, and that's another real challenge for the CSP projects. So overall, the just simple economics is driving the region towards PV, and the cost of the panels has fallen so much that they are way cheaper than CSP in this region at the moment.
Great, thank you very much. I'm conscious of time, but I'd just like to take one last question, and perhaps Muna could answer this because it's more of a policy, either, I guess, Muna or Mohammed. And the question is about the role of energy from waste, you know, and what role does it have from a government's perspective, really, in the future of sustainable energy in the UAE? And maybe perhaps Muna could comment on it, or even Mohammed, obviously, because of your experience.
With regards to waste to energy, it actually does not fall directly under the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure umbrella, considering that the waste as a raw material, as a, let's say, product, has been managed by the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. The BIA experience in managing waste, and then Basically, the remaining leftover from the treatments will be used to produce power as a final, basically, solution for them to treat these kind of waste, which does not have normally a normal treatment process available for us. So what I understood from the recent announcement that we have in Abu Dhabi, let's say, for example, in Abu Dhabi and Al Ain, there will be also coming up 2 projects with regards to having utilization of their waste to produce energy. They are a bit smaller scale compared to what we have from BIA when it's come to the capacity of the megawatt generated. However, when it's come to the policies and regulating these kind of process, it's fall under the Ministry of the Climate Change.
If I would like to add also to complement what my colleague Mona said, it depends on what hat are you wearing. Is it a power utility point of view or an environmental protection and waste management solution point of view? So we in BIA are looking into waste to energy as a waste management solution at the end cycle of the waste, which is instead of disposing the waste into landfill, we would rather turn that waste into value. And power happened to be a byproduct of the process. So this is how we look at it. From a commercial point of view as well, it's more feasible to look at it from a waste management point of view rather than a power utility.
Great, thank you very much, everybody. That brings us to the end of our session today. We've run out of time. There are a few other questions as well that's come through. So what we'll do is we'll try to respond to that after the seminar. Obviously, ATA Insight will send you the recording as well for those of you who are interested. And with that, thank you all very much for listening to us. And I'd like to thank especially my speakers very, very much indeed for a very, very interesting and stimulating discussion. Thank you very much and good afternoon.